Hey guys, this is Logan, and this is my husband, John.
Hi.
So we're starting a YouTube channel called, what are you calling it, John?
Two Bears and a Story.
So this channel will have a bunch of different things. So today we're going to be talking about a true crime case, but eventually we'll have a bunch of other things like mythology, mysteries, unsolved cases, really anything that floats our boat or spikes our interest. So today,
Can I say something?
Yeah.
If they have suggestions too, they should send some in.
Oh yeah, 100%. If there's cases or stories that you guys want us to talk about and we're interested in it after reading about it, yeah, we'll 100% talk about it. Any story I'll look into. So today we're gonna be playing Overwatch while we talk about a case that's actually pretty close to our home because we live in Nova Scotia. We're talking about the Portapique mass shooter that happened in 2020 in Nova Scotia.
The year we met.
Yeah, it is the year we met. During COVID, 2020, COVID times, people. I know.
Fun.
Love that. Remember that.
Oh, what fun that was.
Yeah, not very. But anyway, so while we talk about the case, I'm going to have Overwatch playing, and you'll see us play some games together while we talk about this case. But the game is really a background because main focus will be on the stories. So the case we're talking about, the Portapique. I can never say anything properly, so that's why I have him. Or any like special questions of real life stuff. That's what I use him for. Okay, so we'll get into the case. All right, so today we'll talk about the Portapique mass shooter. This is a murder case that happened in 2020, as I already said. It was the murder of 22 individuals among the... It was date range of April 18th to 19th.
Yeah, it spanned over... It was almost over 2 days.
Yes, it happened. It started the evening of the 18th, I believe, and it spanned till midday, I think, the 19th. Something like that.
Yeah, it was in the afternoon. It was early afternoon.
Yeah, something like that. I know I was at work. You were at work at the time.
I
remember it. There was a lot of updates on it while we were both working.
Yeah.
We hadn't met each other by then, though, did we?
No, we had not.
I didn't think we did.
No.
So, starting off from when the gunman was young, the gunman's name is Gabriel Wortman. A lot of people don't actually know his name because they just know him as the gunman that caused...
The Portapique shooter.
Yeah. The Portapique shooter that caused the largest
mass shooting in...
Canadian history?
I can't remember if it's Canadian or Nova Scotian history.
Something like that. Either way, it's really important.
It's one of the two.
Yeah.
I think it's the biggest one in Nova Scotia history, but one of the biggest ones in like 300 or so, hundreds of years in all of Canada. 300? Well, just an average date kind of thing is 300, but it's like hundreds of years in Canada or something like that.
Yeah. So I'll interchange his name a lot. I'll use Gabriel Wortman, or I'll use his last name Wortman, or I'll say the gunman. All of these things are to just to talk about him specifically. Just as a disclaimer, we do have 2 dogs, and they're very curious always, so if you see us looking around, it's probably because the dogs are around. So I'll get into the case. So from what I've read so far in my research, Gabriel Wortman did not have the best upbringing. He came from a long line of domestic abuse, child abuse, like a lot of generational abuse. It first started, I believe, with his great-grandfather, whose name was George, and then his grandfather Stanley, and then Wortman's actual father, Paul, So it spanned that whole generation line, and the abuse continued down through each family. Yeah, every son learned it from their father, and it kept
generational abuse.
Yeah, exactly. So, before I talk about more Wortman, I'm going to discuss a little bit about Paul, his father, just because Paul's a pretty important in the case, too, because he gives some information later on. Also, he has several brothers, actually 4 in total. Their names are Neil, Glenn, Alan, and Chris. The main one that's in this case is Glenn. He comes up for a couple things, just histories. So, Wortman was raised in his family home in Moncton, New Brunswick, and he, from a very young age, endured a lot of abuse from his family, his father specifically. His upbringing was really rough. Wortman, even from a young age, from I believe it was 2.5 years old, his father decided that he didn't need his favorite blanket anymore and burned it to ashes right in front of his son. There was a few times that Paul would drive Wortman out on a secluded dirt road, and Wortman would say later on that he swore that his father was going to kill him or leave him there, but obviously that never happened. There's one account of Paul giving his son a gun and asking him to point it at himself, or to Paul, and shoot him. And Wortman would say later on that he really wanted to, but didn't, obviously. So there was also other times where the abuse wasn't just directed towards Wortman. There was a lot of abuse towards his mother from his father as well, and Wortman was witness to most of it, if not all of it. So there was one time at a Christmas dinner that Wortman and his family was having, that his mother was saying something. I don't know specifically what was said, but it aggravated Paul, and Paul would strike her to the ground and then repeatedly kick her right in front of the son. And this is when he was still at a very young age. There was also another time where Paul forced Wortman at the age of not even 10 years old to kill the family dog. I don't know if this is because the dog was dying or just because. It didn't. I couldn't find anything that specified that. There was another time too, speaking about Glenn, that this abuse in the family home was witnessed by more than just the family. So Glenn, who was babysitting Wortman at the time, when he was a toddler, witnessed his mother being strangled by his father, and Glenn was there and witnessed the whole thing. So the family knew about the domestic abuse and the generational abuse. Everyone in the family knew, but for some reason it wasn't brought forward. Sometimes I read spots where the brothers said that they were kind of in fear of Paul, of what he might do if they spoke up, which is kind of weird to me.
Sense though, if your brother was he the older brother or younger brother?
I think he's one of the younger ones, but I might be wrong because I don't remember that one specifically.
Yeah, but if you see your sibling doing all this abusive things to other things and having I guess mental capabilities to do these things to living animals and stuff like that, when you're more a compassionate, empathetic person, it makes sense that you'd be kind of scared of them.
I guess. I just mean, as an adult, I would think.
As an adult, it's different, but when you're a kid.
Yeah, but I mean, the brothers didn't, when they were older, after Wortman was born. I don't know why they didn't come forward and say something. I'm not trying to blame victims, obviously. That's not what I'm here to do. It's just a question I have. Wortman really, his family home was not a safe place. Not only was his father very abusive towards him, but his mother was also kind of, I'd say not absent, but definitely not loving. She really
shouldn't have any compassion or empathy, probably.
Well, there was several times that it was Wortman said that his mother would tattletale on him to his father if she found him doing something that she knew his father wouldn't like. So he learned very quickly that he couldn't trust her either. So he grew up in a very
It's a very destructive household.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the majority of Wortman's childhood until he got a little older and was able to go to university. He went to the University of in New Brunswick, and he actually studied psychology. So that's what I did.
Well, you did.
Yeah.
This is him, by the way, not my sweater.
Yeah, that's my sweater, but I never get to wear it, so it hardly fits me anymore, so it is what it is.
So it's mine.
So I can understand why you went for psychology, because I found it really interesting. Obviously, I'm doing this, and it has to do with psychology, talking about killers and stuff like that, and why they do that. But, yeah. So he went on to study psychology, and he actually became a funeral director, which is interesting in its own sense, because I feel like you have to be a specific person to become a funeral director. I don't think I'd be able to do it.
I could.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I thought about it in the past before I started the career that I'm in now. I thought about becoming a funeral director.
Oh, okay.
I thought of becoming a mortician.
The funeral director, does that deal with, like...
Funeral directing is literally directing the funeral. It's not a mortician that deals with the dead bodies. You would, from what I understand, you would pick up the bodies. Like when your grandfather passed away a couple years ago, they were funeral directors.
Oh, okay.
The morticians...
They're the ones that actually dress the body.
Yeah, but you need to have, like, very high medical degree to do that.
Makes sense, because you got to interact with the body.
Yeah.
Anyway, after he became a funeral director, he actually didn't stay in that career for very long, but he did, when he was in university, he did find his first wife, who he would marry, but they didn't last very long, because he would remarry again later on in life. So, as a funeral director, he did his job for a few years, but then he actually gave that up and went into practicing dentistry. Well,
orthodontist. He became an orthodontist.
Like, he opened a denture clinic, so...
Anything to do with the teeth is an orthodontist, though.
But that's what he
became
did.
An orthodontist.
Yeah. So he would open up his own business later on in life, and he did eventually build up a good clientele. Even though it seemed like Wortman was creating a life for himself and actually doing good, what went on in those businesses that he created. Definitely not the most legal.
No.
Yeah. So, in this career, Wortman would treat a multitude of different people. A lot of people, however, were from vulnerable minorities in the population.
The African American community, indigenous communities.
Yeah, a lot
any type of minorities where they would have struggled financially to get the funds they would need to get dentures for their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, whoever they would need to get done.
Like anyone that's like on disability, unemployment, anything like that.
Welfare, anything.
Those were a lot of his clients. Since they were minorities, Wortman was able to exploit these groups. He actually, on a lot of occasions, would... exploit them for services of sex or give unwanted suggestive sexual comments. Yeah, there was a lot of that going on in the clinic. Several people who used to work there, I read, that remembered these things happening several times. He would, along with exploiting them, he would use them to bring in more clients, because sometimes he would pay off his clients to get them to bring their family members in to give services as well.
Well, when people are struggling like that, I get how desperate, especially with how the economy is turning now. They'd get even more desperate depending on the situation they're in.
Yeah, I know. It can be hard, and it's definitely hard right now. Wortman would also, he would always promise lower fees on his services and that, and he was able to do that because of the DCS, the Department of Community Services.
Yep.
Yeah, they've helped him a lot in this portion, which I wish they would have done a bit of background checking on him, because they, in total, over the 5 years that Wortman was running his business from 2015 to 2020, he received $434,000 from the DCS.
That doesn't surprise me.
It's not surprising, but still, I wish they would have.
They should have done more of a background check.
They really should have. And that actually goes into the aftermath of this case, because they did come forth afterwards and do a lot of investigation internally.
But the investigations were forced by the public. Like, we'll have to get into that too, is how the government, the police and stuff like that, they didn't jumpstart the investigation, even though, spoiler alert, I know, one of their own officers was killed on the line of duty during everything.
Yeah.
They didn't start an investigation. They didn't want to start anything until a petition started coming out to get the investigation started.
Yeah, there's a lot of
there was a lot of
poor police
I don't want to say
I know.
I don't want to say it because I don't really know, but like a lot of covering up the bad mistakes that they did.
Yeah. We'll talk about it later when we talk about the actual events of the spree murders. There's a lot of mistakes that were made, in my opinion, that could have saved.
But it's not only your opinion or mine. It's like the
whole
I know.
Province. There's a lot of people.
There was an uproar through the whole province because of how everything was handled.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll get into that in a little bit. I just want to finish up this section here. So, as I said, the DCS was giving him money for his services, so that allowed him to provide services at a reduced cost. But as I said, they didn't really look into him, so he was getting this money, he was bringing in all these clients, but he was exploiting all of them, like sex workers. Everyone was coming to him. So, as I said, I wish the DCS would have looked into him, because he actually did have previous criminal history by this point in 2015. There were several occasions that the police were introduced to Wortman and things that he was doing, and that started early as 2000, the year 2000. So, in the year 2000, Wortman and his family, his father and his mother, actually went on a trip to Cuba. And during this trip, there was actually a fight between Wortman and his father, Paul, where Wortman beat his father unconscious. So the reason for this was, what I read was, Wortman confronted his father about the child abuse and the generational abuse that was going on. And Paul obviously denied it, and that aggravated Wortman, which then caused the fight. So the police were already aware of Wortman and his behavior by the year 2000, but it keeps going. In 2010, there was a phone call to Paul's brother Glenn from Wortman, where Wortman literally said that he planned on going to his parents' house in Moncton and killing them. Which Glenn, obviously, like any normal person, would be like, oh shit, I gotta go call the police, and he did. And the police looked into it, I put in quotations, because they talked to both parties. They talked to Paul and Wortman. Paul didn't know about the call, obviously, but he gave information about the fact that he knew of legal weapons that Wortman had in his cottage, and I think it's a cottage in Portapique.
Oh.
But yeah, he had illegal weapons there. Paul said he hadn't seen them for 5 years, so the police said they really couldn't look into it that much because it was such a long time. And when they went to Wortman obviously denied everything, the phone call, the weapons, everything. But it's not the first time that the weapons come up. So in 2011, there was a memo circulating among the police that Wortman was actually a threat to police. Whether this threat was created by him or other things, I couldn't really get, but the police knew that they had a memo circulating within the police that he was a threat to police. Along with that, there was another occasion in July of 2013 where a 911 call came in from Wortman's neighbors. Called in about a domestic dispute that was happening in the home between Wortman and his second wife, Lisa Banfield, who we'll talk about a little later. And during this 911 call, the neighbor talked about the domestic dispute, but she also brought up the fact that she knew about illegal weapons that Wortman was holding in his cottage. She even told police that several of the neighbors knew about it because he apparently was flaunting them around, showing them off to his neighbors. So a lot of people knew about the weapons, but still they didn't look into it. I don't know if it was an issue with getting a search warrant or what was the reason, but nothing really came out of that. The weapon part, so Wortman was on the police's radar and they knew about him. The last thing I'll talk about too before we get into the events of the 18th and 19th of April is Wortman was seeing a psychologist in 2009. It was referred to by his doctor. The psychiatrist he was seeing diagnosed him as a narcissistic personality, which I can see from his upbringing. It makes sense that he would develop something like that. But this only took 4 sessions with the psychiatrist to realize that he also, as a narcissist, this alone would show you the fact of him being a narcissist. He literally said to his doctor after he refused to go back to see the psychiatrist anymore, he said that even though he was drinking 12 beers a day, 5 days a week, that he could stop any time, and he wasn't an alcoholic.
That's what all alcoholics say.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
That's a lot of the background of Wortman, and now we'll actually get into the events that happened. So I have a timeline of the events here. Well, that was an interesting
That was our
noise.
puppy, sorry.
That was an interesting noise. Very verbal.
She's sitting underneath the desk.
Oh, that was her? I thought it was him.
No, he's out in the living room.
Oh, okay.
Or the bedroom. He's either in his kennel or in his spot in the bedroom.
Here's some crotchety. I don't know what that was about. Alright, so to start off the events of the 18th and 19th, I'm actually going to talk about his second wife, Lisa Banfield. Lisa Banfield was Wortman's second wife, and they actually met. They went to a bar on their first date, and apparently on their first date, Lisa said that Wortman brought a dozen roses to woo her over. And after 3 months, he was already asking her to move into his apartment above his denture clinic.
It's a bit quick.
It is a bit quick, but she agreed to it.
He owned multiple properties, though, because he owned one in Onslow Mountain, too.
Well, he had his cottage in Portapique, but he also...
Onslow Mountain. Specifically, where his cottage was Onslow Mountain.
But yeah, he also had the apartment above his denture clinic. She did agree to move in with him. And after that, they didn't put the brakes on that relationship at all. After they moved in, they would start their track on almost 20 years together. 20 years of abuse from her husband and almost kill her. Lisa Banfield didn't actually get introduced to her husband's abusive side until roughly 2 years into their relationship. It was 2 years in a relationship that the couple went to a party at a friend's house when Wortman and Lisa decided that Wortman would be the DD to drive home. And it was shortly after that that Wortman would start drinking, and Lisa would get irritated, they'd argue, and she would actually leave him at the party. Somehow, after leaving him at the party, he would track her down and actually jumped into her car and started assaulting her. She would jump out of her car, and run into the woods to hide, but Wortman would actually drag her back out of the woods and pull her back to the road and continue to assault her on the road there. And it wasn't until 2 headlights showed up that Wortman finally stopped assaulting her, and Lisa at that point said that they were broken up, which, as in a lot of cases, abusers and abusees break up, get back together.
Yes.
Break up, get back together, which is what happened. So she would eventually get back with him, but that was the first incident of the abuse, and it just continued on through the 20 years they were together. So back to the story. I would say that April 18th started as a normal day, but honestly that'd be a lie because we're talking about 2020 times.
COVID-19.
Exactly.
It was not rampant here at that time, though. It was starting.
Yeah, but there was still the lockdowns, and that started. I remember in 2020, March is when it first dropped down here.
Yes, it was March, because the kids never went back to school after March break.
So there was lockdown. So yeah, COVID times are rampant. So the pandemic was in full effect at this point, so a lot of businesses were closed. Kids were home from school. Nobody could really...
Everything was shut down unless it was essential.
Yeah, nobody could really do anything at the time.
You weren't even allowed to walk into stores. You had to do it, like, online shopping was pretty much all we could do.
Yeah,
and if you did go into a store, it could only be, like, 1 or 2 people from your household. And there had to be people at the doors manning how many people were in the store at a certain time.
Mm-hmm. I remember it. I worked at Sobeys at the time. So.
I was at a gas station. I was managing a gas station at the time.
So that's the times we're talking about right now with COVID. So the world was very different. And as I said, businesses were closed. And this included Wortman's business. So the business he was running, he couldn't run anymore because it was closed off. So he had a lot of free time on his hand. And
well, it's not only that, he was under a lot of stress like the rest of us because we didn't know.
Yeah, like
it was the first time in anybody's lives where it was literally we were waking up every day and it was uncertainty of what was going to happen.
Yeah, nobody knew
what was going to happen. Nobody knew if businesses were ever going to open again. Nobody knew what businesses could operate as what.
Yeah, exactly. It was all just a mystery at that point because nobody knew what was next. I like to think he might have got a little squirrely, like a lot of us did when we were in lockdown. A lot of us didn't know what to do with ourselves because humans are social animals. Like, we're social people. We always...
Well, crime rates raised.
Oh, did they?
For everything, yes.
Oh,
for thefts. For everything. Like, crime rates raised during the lockdown.
Everyone was going squirrely.
Yeah, everyone was going stir crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And Wortman was as well. That evening, Wortman would start off his massacre, the April 19th. It would all start with his assault on his wife, Lisa, where he actually handcuffed her and dragged her into his replica police cruiser. And yes, I did say replica police cruiser.
Yep.
Yeah.
Looked just like a cop car. He even had a uniform.
Yep, he had his own uniform.
He had a uniform and a badge.
Yeah, he had everything.
He had the lights, the sirens, the decals on the side, the numbers, everything. He got it over the years, piece by piece. So when the police are done with their cruisers, they actually strip them of all their parts and then sell them to the public.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they'll strip them of all their parts. The lights, radio system, GPS trackers, anything they have in there that it would be illegal for like a civilian like you or I to have, and then they sell them off.
Oh, okay.
And then they buy new cruisers.
Wow.
So you can go to a police auction and get seized vehicles, old police cars, stuff like that. Like I said, it's just stripped, so you kind of got to go, like, if you're looking for police technology like the radar system, radar guns, laptops, stuff like that, you do kind of have to go like black market, deep web kind of searching for things.
Which I'm sure he did.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the decals on the side of the cars, obviously, if they're selling them, are stripped, but anybody that knows how to decal a car can pull that off.
And
it sucks to say, but it highly breaking the law, but
people do it. Yep. So yes, so he would drag Lisa in handcuffs into his police cruiser and start assaulting her. As she was being dragged through the home, she could smell gasoline and notice that the house was covered in gasoline. And after he had assaulted her and thrown her into the car, he went back into the house to light the house aflame. The house, as it was starting to burn up, she actually escaped through, I believe it was one of the front windows of the cruiser, yeah. And she ran into the woods to hide, and she would stay there overnight.
She stayed there during the whole process.
She stayed there.
Everything happened at the end.
It was 12 hours she would stay in the woods hidden.
I thought it was even longer.
No, I'm pretty sure I read it was 12.
I know she didn't come out right away afterwards because I don't think she knew what had happened at the end.
Well, she also thought that he was still... Because he told her, when he threw her in the car, he told her that if she tried to escape, he would kill her. So she
assumed that he was still around.
Yeah, and looking for her. Yeah, but after she ran and hid, Wortman would actually pile all of his guns, put on his police uniform, and drive off in his police cruiser as his house burned up. And
was that was the cottage in Onslow Mountain?
Yes. Yeah. But after driving off, that's when the massacre would start.
To give retrospect as well, Onslow Mountain is a community that is close to Truro, which is a big hub in Nova Scotia. You can get anywhere you really need to from the highway and the exits around Truro. There's exits towards Amherst, which would lead you to New Brunswick. There's exits that will lead you to Cape Breton. There's exits that will lead you to the Home Bay area, Halifax, Truro, Dartmouth. There's pretty much an exit to go anywhere in Truro as a big hub. Onslow Mountain is like a 10 to 20 minute drive from Truro. Oh, on the other side, towards New Glasgow and Pictou area.
Okay. So, now as I talk about this is the hard part of the case, when the massacre started. So, after Wortman drove off, a frantic 911 call would come in from the residence of Jamie and Greg Blair. In this 911 call, Jamie would describe a scene of horror, saying her husband had been shot dead in the yard by Wortman, who was wearing a full police uniform and had a police cruiser. This she did say to the police on the 911 call. That is important. That is like something I'd like to really stress. This very first 911 call, it was told to the police that he was in this get-up and cruiser. So during the 911 call, Jamie had already forced her children into hiding after she had witnessed her husband being shot. But afterwards, while on the phone still with 911 operators, Jamie would hide in the bathroom, but Wortman would enter the home and find her and fatally shoot her. Afterwards, he would scatter logs in the home around the house, as well as piling random rubbish on top of the stove and starting the stove to set that house ablaze too. I don't really know why he wanted to light all the houses on fire. That I don't know why.
He was probably a pyromaniac.
Probably just was done with everything, and
he probably wanted everything burned because that was the last way to get rid of everything.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, the house did start to light on fire, but Jamie and Greg's children did escape the home, and they actually would travel to their neighbor's house, who was named Lisa McCulley. She actually saw the flames starting at Wortman's home and would go out to investigate. and Wortman would drive by and fatally wound her as well, leaving her 2 children in the home safe. But Greg and Jamie's children would travel to Lisa McCulley's home, and her children would let them in. So that's 4 children who already had their lives changed completely in the blink of an eye. And that's just the beginning. So the children together would send out a 911 call as well, describing the events that happened. But Wortman would leave. Wortman left quickly after killing Lisa McCulley. He would then drive to the residence of Joy and Peter Bond, and Aaron and Emily Tuck and Jolene Oliver. These were 2 houses that were next door to each other and neighbors to his home as well. But he would gun down all 5 of these people as well. He would then backtrack up north to the home of Dawn and Frank Gulenchin. I'm sorry if I'm butchering names. I'm not good at reading names, so I try my best. But yeah, so he would kill these 2 individuals as well and set their house on fire. At this time, his property had grown increasingly noticeable by several neighbors. Some of these neighbors would drive up to his home, and they were calling the police, describing the events that happened. However, a good Samaritan is an easy target for a spree killer.
Yes.
So Andrew and Kate McDonald, who had arrived at Wortman's home by like 10:30, they were calling the police, but Wortman would actually pull up right beside them and shoot them. But they actually would not be fatally wounded. He would shoot 2 rounds, which one round penetrated Andrew's shoulder, while the other one grazed his head. But Wortman didn't stay too long. He would leave right after this and go to another neighbor's home. They both survived the encounter with Wortman, but it was definitely a scary event that was unfolding in Portapique. Within the next 10 minutes, Wortman would reach his neighbors, Joanne Thomas and John Zal, fatally shooting them both, setting their house ablaze. And lastly, he would shoot and kill Corey Ellison, who was another Good Samaritan, who just came out of his father's home. He was actually just visiting his father that lived in the area, and he would go out of the home to see Wortman's house on fire, and Wortman would come up and shoot him as well. After killing Ellison, Wortman would actually travel to the DeBert Business Park, and he would sleep overnight in his car. So all of this happened basically in the sum of like 45 minutes. Yes. Everything that I've already
A lot of
discussed.
It was very quick.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times where it was very quick, and then a lot of times where you didn't hear from him or see nobody saw him, nothing was going on. So there was a lot of times where the police were in action, and there was a lot of times where they kind of had their shoelaces tied because they didn't know what to do because there was no sightings of them. Because there was, I'm sure the police lines were held up too because hysteria, once it was made public that he was in a police car and there was a gunman and he had already killed this many people, a lot of people kind of lose trust. And anytime they saw a police car, they'd call the police.
Exactly.
And be like, I just saw him.
Yeah. So the following morning, Wortman would leave to travel to Wentworth at 5:45.
Then he went to Wentworth.
Why?
Wentworth's in the opposite direction of where he got caught.
Well, he did a lot of circling around.
I was going to say, Wentworth is on the back highways between Truro and Amherst, which is heading towards the New Brunswick border. But it's on the back highway, which isn't patrolled very often because it's an old highway.
So Lisa would finally emerge from the woods, and she would actually seek out officers and inform them about Wortman. And she informed them about the fact that he was in a police cruiser and was fixed with a full outfit and everything. But the police already knew this at that point from the 911 call from Jamie Blair. Once Wortman arrived in Wentworth, he went to the home of Elena Jenkins and Sean McLeod. Alana, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Here he would kill them both, and he actually would stay on the residence for almost 3 hours after killing them. It was at roughly 8 o'clock. Police would finally verify what both Banfield and Jamie Blair's 911 call and several other 911 calls were saying, with Wortman having this replica police gear. At this point, Constable Heidi Stevenson, by 8:45, was asking why and if the information about the police cruiser would be released to the public, because at this point it was not released to the public.
Nobody knew anything about it.
Nobody knew he had a cruiser. Nobody knew he had a get-up. Nobody even knew a gunman was on the loose, I don't believe, at that point.
They released everything at once, from what I remember. But they were very hush-hush about everything going on. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, when you're getting so many reports about everything, and there's, as well, like, they didn't even use the national alert system either.
So after Constable Heidi brought it up, asking why it wasn't released, a lot of the police, higher-ups were saying that the reason why they weren't releasing it was they didn't want to create a widespread panic. Which, yes, I can understand that, but at the same time, it would have probably saved some lives if they had released it sooner.
Probably.
I'm not an officer, but it's hard to think that it wouldn't have helped. So, at the same time as Constable Heidi questioning this judgment in information release, Wortman was leaving the residence of McLeod and Jenkins when Tom Bagley was passing by, and Wortman would fatally shoot him as well. Just a passerby walking by.
Yep.
It wasn't until shortly after 9 o'clock that police shared on Facebook and Twitter that there was a 51-year-old man armed and dangerous at large. However, they would still refuse to let people know he was in a police cruiser of his own. They only released that the gunman was out there. They didn't release that he was in police gear.
No, I remember.
Yeah. So Wortman would then travel after killing Tom Bagley. He would travel south to Glenholm, stopping to shoot at another person, Lillian Campbell, who was just out for a walk. She was just enjoying the nice weather that was out, and she was gunned down as well. It wasn't until 9:40 that police were realizing Wortman had left Portapique. So this is like after he had left, 12 hours later, and they still didn't realize that he had left. Yeah. So, and this is at 9:40, so he's already been out killing other people outside of Portapique. At 9:45, Wortman and Constable Rodney Peterson passed each other on the highway. And Peterson actually recognized the vehicle and broadcast the sighting and tried to follow him, but he would have to backtrack to follow. And he would eventually lose him. At 9:50, Wortman stopped at the property of Adam and Carol Fisher, who recognized him from police and hid and called 911. Unbeknownst to them or the police, though, after they hid, he actually just left the property. Then after 10 a.m., Kristen Beaton, CCPA, was going to visit her home care client when Wortman pulled up next to her and fatally shot her as well. Sadly, Beaton was also pregnant. Yeah.
I remember.
I know. So another resident named Heather O'Brien was actually 30 seconds behind Wortman driving when she actually pulled over to call a friend after she heard gunshots. Wortman would see her stop, and he would pull up beside her and fatally shoot her through the window while she was on the phone as well. It was shortly after 10:15 police would finally release a photo of Wortman's replica vehicle. which was more than 12 hours since they were informed of this by Jeannie Blair during her 911 call. 10:40 was the time of Wortman's next sighting. Shortly after, he would fire 3 shots at Officer Chad Morrison, who Wortman pulled up beside. Officer Morrison would drive away and actually survive this encounter. Heidi Stevenson, at this point, would travel to the location where Morrison and Wortman were last seen, or Morrison's last location with Wortman. She would eventually find Wortman, and she would collide with Wortman's vehicle, and the two would actually start a
gunfight.
Yeah, a gunfight, a shootout, which Wortman would eventually fatally wound Officer Heidi, and afterwards he would take her pistol and the ammunition included. After the collision and the gunfight, Joey Weber, another resident in the neighborhood, was driving by and seen the car crash, and as a good Samaritan, he got out of the vehicle to offer assistance, which Wortman would then hold him at gunpoint, and he would put Joey into his police cruiser and fatally shoot him in the back seat. After which he would light both cars on fire, and then he would drive away in Joey Weber's SUV. Wortman would U-turn back towards fellow denturist Gina Gallette's home, which Gina Gallette used to work with Wortman in. She was a fellow denturist as well. She knew he was at large, and she locked her door and, I believe, called her daughter, and she hid in the ensuite bathroom. However, Wortman would find and fatally shoot her and steal her gray hatchback. So that's 2 vehicles he changed. At roughly 11:30, the gunman arrived at the Enfield Big Stop for gas, which shortly after, RCMP officer Craig Hubley and Ben McLeod arrived and recognized them. They would shoot several times at Wortman, who had also raised his gun and shot himself. And at this point, it was finally over. After around 13 hours, Wortman's murder spree was finally over. 22 people lost their lives on the events that unfolded April 18th and 19th of 2020. But there had to be some good that came out in the end. It's hard to say that much came out good, but the community in Portapique, they really wanted to move forward after the events.
A lot of the communities did.
Yeah, nobody wanted to dwell on it. There was a lot of memorial services, but this is during COVID, so a lot of time, the normal thing that people would do to mourn, they couldn't do because you couldn't have large groups. So there was a lot of moments of silence within your own homes for the people who passed. There was roadside displays of stuffed animals, cards, signs, everything like that.
It was a lot for Joey's family because he left behind, I believe it was a newborn baby, and his wife was pregnant, but I believe they didn't know that he was pregnant when he passed away.
Yeah, I remember you were saying that when I brought it up. Later on, there was a lot of petitions for different things. I know there was a petition done to shut down his denture clinic, which
they wanted it destroyed.
Yeah, they wanted that thing destroyed.
They wanted every property he owned destroyed.
Which I don't blame them. I'm just saying, if you've seen the denture clinic when it was still a denture clinic, it was really creepy. He had a giant smile of teeth on the side of the building, and then a big denture teeth on the front. It was really creepy looking. I didn't like it, and I had to drive by it every day when I was in university on the bus.
Well, the thing you didn't mention either is that his denture clinic, it wasn't like a high-end establishment in Halifax or anything like that. It was in a lower financially advanced area than other orthodontists.
Yeah.
Like, he was in an area that was surrounded by people that he targeted.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah.
That's why he was able to target them so easily. But aside from petitions for that, like you said, there were petitions to remove all of his
properties and everything.
There was eventually in Portapique there would be the erection of a new playground for children because a lot of the families really wanted a sense of security back for their children. They really wanted to move forward after this terrible massacre that occurred. They eventually would create a community hall or something like that, and they would put on programs to honor some of the people that passed. Several of the people, like Emily Tuck, who was very into music, there was programs raised in honor of her. There was several other of the deceased. There was programs put on for sports. I'm trying to think of the other one, but several different programs to honor.
Scholarships in Joey's name, I believe, too.
Yeah, several things were put in place to honor the people who passed. Like I mentioned previously, the DCS would eventually, they would do an internal investigation into everything that went on with the money that was provided to Wortman. And so that's all that we have for the case of the Portapique shooter. It was a very sad case. It affected a whole, like...
province.
Yeah, province, nation. I don't know if it affected Canada as much as just Nova Scotia, but it was definitely...
I would say devastating.
Devastating, yeah.
I would say it's a devastating part of the history of Nova Scotia.
Yeah, and it really shook the whole community because it was something that never has occurred in Nova Scotia before. So, yeah. That's really all we have to say about the case. Please subscribe to us, leave us a like, and we'll get back with
story.
Yeah, we'll get back with more stories. Might not be a true crime next time, but I have something in the works. So we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.